So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to panel number 4 in the FitTech Summit in 2021. I'm super thrilled to be on stage with these 4 super experts on this topic of health and fitness data. So my name is Lutz. I'm going to be your host for this morning, evening, or afternoon, depending on where you're from. And we're going to have a discussion around what kind of data are relevant for our clients. We just learned in the last 30 minutes that exercise could be the pill and the answer to all these problems. But now we're going to discuss the technology in order to identify the underlying cause of the disorder and these problems. And also the biggest advantages of this technology to track the progress of where we are going with the help of exercise or with the help of our lifestyle changes that we want to adopt. And we're going to discuss these topics with Daniel, who is the CEO of Lumen. We're going to have a discussion with Chris, who's just joining us, who is the CEO and founder of AirPop, and also with Phil from Supersapiens, who is going to give us more insights around the topic of continuous glucose monitoring and what are the added benefits to this. In order to kickstart this panel, I would like to give you a brief summary of the companies that we're going to discuss and where this discussion should actually go. So this is the interesting part where I like to share my screen, and I should be able to just share the keynote slides, and you should be able to see this in full screen mode right now. Perfect. So as I just said, we have Daniel on stage, we have Phil on stage, Chris and me. I'm a medical doctor from Germany. I'm a retired doctor from the German military, and the data of health and fitness has been in the center of my attention since 2005, when I was asked to lead the sports medicine department for the German forces. And the first thing that they assigned me to do was create and test a new fitness protocol for the German military and use it also as part of an annual retesting program to see the new fitness levels of our military personnel before we send them on foreign missions. And then in 2013, we started a human performance optimization program. Again, what are the relevant data points that we need to collect around the individual fighter pilots in order to them make them fit enough to fly the latest version of the fighter plane called the Eurofighter, which has been adopted in various countries around this planet. In 2015, I retired from the German military, and now I run my own sports medicine clinic, and I consult various startups from the health and fitness ecosphere. And currently, I'm the chief medical officer for a startup called Nambaya, which is collecting medical-grade data from an electrocardiogram and deriving the respiratory rate, the heart rate variability, movement, activity, and sleep quality in order to give feedback on the individual recovery and performance levels. And this is also one of the big things to explore new health markets, because we don't go through the doctor's practices, but we rather explore new and the second health market like pharmacies and personal trainers and physiotherapists. We're super excited to have Daniel with us today, who will show us how to unlock our metabolism. His team has invented a portable spirometer where you can check your current metabolism at any given moment and also track your progress if you're heading in the right direction. Because we know from the literature that a lot of people struggle with their metabolism. Around 80% of the adult population is no longer metabolic fit or healthy, and that will then lead to this massive problem on a global plane, the metabolic syndrome, which is a combination of high blood pressure, disturbances in your glucose metabolism, and then onset of cardiovascular disease and high blood pressure. So that's a global pandemic, just as even worse as probably the COVID-19 pandemic. and we need to find solutions for this one. And the one solution that is really interesting because it's really cutting edge technology is the technology that Phil is going to introduce us to. This is the use of continuous glucose monitoring in order to assess your current metabolic response to what you eat and what you drink and what you do in exercise and when you train. And he just told me that a lot of people struggle with good levels of fuel for your exercise, and he will probably give us more insights in that in the next 55 minutes. Last but not least, a very hot topic at this time of the year is the way to smarten up your FFP mask to get additional data points for your health and safety around the globe. And this is the technology that Chris has built inside his very cool, very new product, the AirPop Halo Plus. And I'm really sure that he will also give us more insights into these products. So let's get the panel started and welcome on stage Daniel. So I'd like to start off with you, and please unmute your microphone.
Yes.
How did you realize that you have a solution for this global pandemic of metabolic syndrome?
I think we didn't realize it to begin with. It's an evolving concept. In 2014, I was an entrepreneur of my whole career in the last 20 years, and my spouse and her twin sister came from the physiology space as scientists, researchers. From the nutrition space, they were both nutritionists, and from the fitness space, they were both Ironman athletes with very deep passion into nutrition. And I was fascinated about nutrition from a personal perspective. The startup experience had a toll on me, and I was about 20 pounds overweight. And I wanted to understand, how can I get control over my own body? It was a very selfish moment, and I had a phenomenal teacher living with her, and we started looking at this opportunity of having a biofeedback, a feedback loop on the things we do, because it's non-existent in nutrition those days. And basically, Michal and Merav, my co-founders, my spouse and her twin sister, came out with the concept of, what if we can measure metabolism? What if we can look at the CO2 content of your breath and bringing a new paradigm to nutrition, which is, am I currently burning fat or carbs as fuel? And this is the data point, and this is kind of the establishment of Lumen. By understanding this metric or this new paradigm of thinking of our body and our fuels in use, we can have a feedback loop to understand what we did yesterday in terms of nutrition, but also in terms of stress, in terms of sleep efficiency, in terms of obviously nutrition and fasting. And we can see the impact of that. And that was the promise of Lumen. Gradually, we started realizing that there is a bigger issue here, which is metabolic health. And that was unveiled to us. And as you know, since 2014, and as we were going forward and building this product, the opportunity unveiled herself. It's much bigger than just weight loss or just fitness and performance improvement. It is actually health, but this is something that healthcare is still not looking deeply into.
So this sounds super fascinating. And for the ones in the audience who've never seen such a respiratory analysis before, what is, in a nutshell, the science foundation of how can you assess whether you burn glucose as a fuel or fat or protein?
Excellent question. So metabolism is being tracked by looking at indirectly, basically, looking at CO2, O2, and flow in your breath. So to measure that, you need a very expensive set of machinery, sensors. You sit down or lie down with a hood on your face, and you need to breathe continuously for about 30, 40 minutes. So tens of thousands of dollars for the device. A physician would look and give you eventually your data. So obviously you can imagine this is no way for people to steer their nutritional decisions. This metric is mainly used for extreme athletes and in research, for research purposes. But the potential of that, having a small device and taking a single breath and performing that was the vision. And it took us a lot of time to build the technology, to validate it and get it peer reviewed and really push the science also forward along with us. And also to find exactly the application. How can that metric come to use in consumer space? Because it was non-existent before.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this insight. And that brings us to the topic that a lot of people don't have a clue what kind of fuel they're actually using. And this brings us also to our second guest, Phil. So if you really screw up your metabolism, you end up being a diabetic. And we know that healthcare recommendations did not do a great job in preventing this global pandemic of type 2 and type 1 diabetes. So when we look at the statistics, right now, 1 in every 11 adult Americans is a diabetic. And a lot of them don't have a clue that they're actually borderline diabetic at this stage. And then there is Phil. So what kind of insights can you share about the use case of continuous glucose monitoring for a healthy, a borderline sick, and a sick population?
Yeah, first, Natalia, thanks for having me, and great to be with such a good group. Daniel, I love what you're doing. It's, as Grace said in the previous visit, you can't change what you can't see. So when someone has visibility to their metabolism, like what Daniel's doing, finds out it's slower today, maybe that's a good indicator to go exercise more or adjust your diet. And I've been saying for years, exercise is the billion-dollar drug that never gets prescribed. And it's great to see that Grace is actually going to run with that and build a business, because I think exercise needs to be something. It's not the only solution, but it's a key solution to a healthier, happier, and life. But the key to exercising consistently is being fueled, right? If you fuel well, you feel well, and if you feel well, you're going to go faster, longer. And for me, Supersapiens, like I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 7 months of age. My parents were told I'd be dead or blind by 25, based on the current standards of treatment, technology, and the age of diagnosis. But at a very young age, once blood glucose testing became available, and mind you, when I was diagnosed, they had to squeeze urine out of my diaper onto a test strip to find out where glucose was 2 to 4 hours in arrears. But once they got glucose testing, they used themselves as a control experiment, and then checked my glucose 10 times a day, which as an infant was far greater than the recommended kind of platform. But they learned something very interesting. The more I was active, the more I was moving, the better my insulin worked, and the better my glucose numbers were. So in the late 80s, at a time when diabetics weren't supposed to compete in sport because of the risk of hypoglycemia on the other side, they said, Phil, you're going to sport. If you're going to have a short life, you're at least going to have an active life. And in that first week of swim practice, I learned 2 important lessons. One, if I had good control of glucose, I could win. Second, more importantly, if I had poor control of glucose, I would fail. And, so you could say for the last 33 years, I've been using glucose as a proxy for performance. But the more you exercise, the easier glucose is to manage the rest of the time. So it's been, sport's been my drug of choice for a lot of years. I used the bike as a way to eat Snickers bars as a kid because the insulin wasn't fast enough. And then in college, I started a company called Team Type 1 because I realized the bike could be a good platform to help other people with diabetes. That led, to a race across America. I got put on a continuous glucose monitoring trial in 2005 with the Freestyle Navigator. And in 20 days of seeing every data point in front of me, I learned more about what everything did to my body than the previous 23 years of obsessing about glucose control. Fast forward, we put an all diabetic team together, raced across America. We found out, in 2006, where we, as people with diabetes, felt best from a glucose perspective, 140 to 180 milligrams per deciliter. Came back the second year, we won the race across America. Started a professional team with athletes with and without diabetes. And as early as 2011, began doing research using continuous glucose monitoring and professional cycling on athletes with and without diabetes. And it was then that I saw like a lot of the things that were happening for an athlete with diabetes were also happening for an athlete without diabetes. And I like to say, during exercise, we're all diabetic. During exercise, we all have to control glucose. And that's kind of the thing that got me on the bike, was that when I was on the bike, I was normal. So fast forward, we have Team Novo Nordisk, all diabetic pro cycling team, and Daniel, to the control of metabolism. We had very good protocols for managing glucose, but over a 7-day stage race, each one of my riders would have one bad day where they didn't judge their metabolism right. They gave a little too much basal insulin, maybe too little basal insulin, and both of those have drastic consequences for performance. So we really needed to solve for that. And fortunately, my office is 20 minutes away from Wahoo Fitness, and on a bike ride, Chip Hawkins of Wahoo said, Chip, I desperately need the data in front of me for my athletes. And he hacked it for me. And similar to that first experience on a CGM, after 15 days of seeing every data point in front of me while on the bike, I learned more about optimizing fuel than in the previous 15 years of having a sensor in my pocket. And this was the best invention I ever had as a person with diabetes. My team Novo Nordisk, racing to educate, empower, and inspire, went on to stand on the podium 19 times that year. We had the best season ever because we had the data, we had control. And I wanted to bring this to market, and I kept hearing the same thing from endurance athlete business advisors that I was seeking guidance from. Of, Phil, I don't have diabetes, but I buy this. I don't have diabetes, I buy this. And
just a quick interruption, Phil. Sorry to interrupt you, but there's a difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and for the healthy population, you just want to get an unfair advantage of their hacking their metabolism. So could you just give a brief explanation? What is the big difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes?
Yep. So I mean, type 1's autoimmune condition. At some point the trigger goes off, and your body destroys your beta cells, and you have diabetes and have to give insulin the rest of your life. Type 2, I feel the type 2 population gets blamed, for what they do unfairly. If you look at human habits, 90% of what you learn from a habit perspective, you learn by the time you're 8 years old. So if your parents had junk food in the house and your parents weren't active, then that's what you saw as normal, and it's very hard to undo that. And so type 2 is kind of the slow degradation, of your ability to produce or utilize insulin, and exercise plays a good role in preventing that. So the good news is, with data, people can change, and that's been one of the things. Again, we've got a lot of data now on over 3,500 athletes using this technology. We've seen that 45% of the time, athletes are not fueling appropriately when they ride. Then we've seen some people who were overweight and obese, but wanted to set a sporting goal, and use the data to cut the things that were bad in their life, start doing the good things, exercise more often, and have some really strong weight loss case studies. But again, we're here. So again, let me step back, because we had this idea, and I went to Abbott. Right, and Abbott's had this technology. They've been developing continuous glucose monitoring for over 20 years now. And I said, I want to bring this to the non-diabetic world. We have an opportunity to help athletes help athletes be happier. And nothing's changed in 33 years. Of when you're happy on the bike, when you're happy when exercising, the rest of the day and the fueling decisions you make, have a much less consequential impact. So, we've been able to bring a product to market. It took 20 years on the diabetes, or 15 years on the diabetes front. We were able to bring it to the market, see approved as a sports performance device within a year and a half of founding the company. And it's just such an honor to be working with Abbott and the Abbott Libre Sense to bring this amazing technology that the diabetic population has validated to the rest of the world, and bring the same anxiety I've been living with about food and nutrition and hypoglycemia and hyperglycemia to the sporting world. And it's an amazing journey, but I think we're all here because we want to make the world a better place. And data without context is just a number. But so the more we can give context to the data, what it means, how to take action on it, the more activity the world is going to have, and that's a pretty exciting opportunity.
Yeah, it's super fantastic, and the data plays a critical role in having instant feedback of what you're doing. And that brings us to not so smooth transition from metabolic disorders and continuous glucose monitoring to what Chris is actually doing. From a number perspective, it's also same depressing as metabolic syndrome and diabetes. We know that more than 10% in the population struggle with their airways, and we roughly have 50 deaths per 100,000 citizens every year due to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is the term that we use, COPD, to describe the underlying chronic, most common disorders of the airways. Chris, how the hell did you run across this problem? And you were probably the ones that was hit the most by the COVID pandemic, because you already had a filtering mask off the shelf ready to sell when COVID hit. So what was your story? Tell a bit more about your background.
Sure. Yeah, so happy to be here. Thank you. This is so cool. Back in 2014, 2015, I was living in China, and my daughter, who was born there, was really suffering from, she had a lot of like respiratory reactions very early on. So like infant pneumonia, she was on a nebulizer for a lot of her early years. It was very frustrating for us, and we suspected it was the air quality, but none of the doctors that we talked to could really give us any sort of conclusive, they couldn't really say for sure, well, we think it's the air, but it was one of these kind of obvious things. And early on, I started to realize, air pollution was not something that was well understood by, I think, the medical community. And so the advice we got was, well, just change the environment and see if her condition improves. And so we did that. We spent a month in California.
So in a nutshell, how would you describe air quality? Because probably nobody in the audience has a clue about how to define it as well.
Yeah, well, so that was actually the story that I went on personally too, because I had no idea. This was something that was a personal health scare that I just started looking into. And the more I learned, the more I realized that air pollution is not one thing. It's so many different things. But the easiest way to understand sort of air pollution is that there's three kind of major threat types. There are what we call anthropogenic threats. Those are human-made things. And when we talk about particulate matter, that's part of the anthropogenic grouping. So that's any kind of carbon combustion that comes from factories, auto emissions, things like that. That stuff is particularly dangerous because those particles are small enough that they cross into the bloodstream. And so COPD is a really interesting kind of case, because most people think about breathing, they think about your respiratory system, but in fact, those particles get into the bloodstream. So it becomes pulmonary right away. It starts to affect all the organs in the body, and it creates plaque in the arteries. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people really understand, but that PM, that sub-micron PM can even cross the blood-brain barrier, the privileged environment.
We learned a lot about COVID, the virus, coronavirus, and how small it is that we need to protect ourselves with a filtering mask. Could you give a ratio of the size of a virus in relation to the size of the particle that airborne also affects our health in the airways and the bloodstream?
Sure. Yeah. So the second group actually is that pathogenic group. So influenza and COVID fall into that group. So in Asia, we're very used to this kind of almost seasonal viral kind of smaller epidemics like SARS, smaller relative to COVID, but still devastating, things like bird flu. So those, in the case of COVID, so an individual virion is actually like nanoscale, so an order of magnitude smaller than what we deal with particulate matter, which are typically micro scale. So we're dealing in microns. And particulate matter, PM 2.5, which you hear a lot about, means that that particle is 2.5 microns in diameter. So those are smaller than the eye can see. It's smaller than the body can naturally filter. And that's why we have to have, a sort of a prosthesis to help us out. All the stuff that's in the air is, at this point, really best dealt with just on a straight size kind of issue where particles of different sizes, well, all of the threat types have particles of different sizes, but we can effectively filter out down to a certain, reliably to a certain size, and that's about 0.1 microns. So it's pretty small. And then the third threat type that is part of this kind of overall air pollution is ecologic. So that's anything naturally occurring in the environment. And so so think about like pollen, for example. That's something that affects people. But here in California, we have wildfires. So smoke from wildfires, or volcanic eruptions, things like that. Anything that's naturally occurring. But that all of those things, anthropogenic, ecologic, and pathogenic, all contribute to what we kind of consider air pollution. Now, the problem was that the problem I saw anyway, as just like an everyday citizen, was if you live in a place that has pervasive kind of ambient air pollution, even at very low levels, you're at risk every day. And you can't really not breathe. You can kind of control what you eat and drink, so in the sense of like you're managing your own fitness and health, what you eat and what you drink and what you breathe are the three major inputs. You can control two of those. You can't control one of them. So it just seemed very strange that the only real solution people had out in the wild was to wear a mask. I mean, that just seems ridiculous to me. But actually, that is the only option. And so when you start looking at the masks that were available, you realize, and I'm a product designer, I come from the world of product innovation, these are like completely crappy products. Look, it's a completely awful product experience. And you can make some very, very small tweaks and dramatically improve that experience. And so that became sort of this quest that we started on, which was, well, we can certainly do a lot of incremental innovation to a mask right away and improve the experience of wearing it around breathability, around comfort and fit, the material innovation itself. Once we do that, where do we go? What else can we do? And so back in 2015, the idea of putting a small set of sensors on a mask seemed like a very natural idea. It seemed like a very obvious idea. Like, what can we learn if we have masks on tens of thousands of people in this market, which was China? And so we were very interested, sort of less on the internal health side and more on where my internal health and my environmental health cross, because that was the area of science that we just really didn't seem to have a whole lot of information. Like, what happens to these particles once they enter the body, and how do they start to affect us, and how do we actually measure that? And there had never been any sort of large-based studies around, just everyday ambient breathing and how that kind of affects you over time. So thinking about like later on, we think about biomarkers and stuff, where that's the growth path that we're all on, I think.
Yeah. So we learned from Daniel that measuring the ratio of CO2 versus O2 and flow plays a role. Then we know from Phil that glucose management is a big role. And what kind of numbers do you come up with your sensors in your mask?
Well, so the first generation of the mask right now, what we're doing is we're really looking at breathing behaviors. So we're not a medical device per se, in the sense that we're capturing data about the composition of your breath. We're looking at breathing behaviors across different activities, and we're looking to build a baseline for users of their own breathing habits. I mean, in the same way that you give consumers a baseline around their heart rate or their step count, for example. So it's kind of a 1.0 level. Getting people a little bit deeper and providing another dimension to their own health understanding. But what we've been doing in the background is very much thinking about ways to identify and look at the exhaled, sort of the breathomics part of it. So looking at what's coming out of those gases in the breath. So currently it's respiration cycles and kind of breathing behaviors.
And so the funny thing is now we actually bridge the gap of all these technologies and putting the numbers together, because the moment you're able to analyze respiratory rate, you could also identify the ones that are borderline diabetic, because the one thing that they have in common is if you screw up your glucose metabolism and you go above the levels that are healthy for you, you actually start to hyperventilate. And this is where we usually see that our clients or our patients will breathe more than 18, 19 breaths per minute. But the problem is they also do that the moment they become agitated. And so we need context to this information. If they're not stressed, if they're not moving, and they breathe heavily and shallow and fast, they could be in danger of becoming a diabetic. And this is where we can push information. And this is something where probably in 5 years from now, we probably see AirPop by Lumen, where we have Lumen technology built inside the mask. Because how cool would that be that we have continuous measurements of our respiratory rate and quotient? So that will be something that could be really neat.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think the other added dimension to that, which is very important for us, is the environmental aspect and the factors that come from the environment and how that bears on our internal health and behavior. So looking at local air quality and the air quality index and kind of crossing that with the actual user's individual behavior is something that, again, we're not seeing a lot of other companies pursue, but I think that's a huge sort of gap right now is understanding our exposures and how that bears on our health states.
Yeah. Strongly agree. And that brings us back to Daniel. So on your statistics, you say that this metabolic syndrome and all the aftermath cost us roughly a little bit more than $400 billion every year just for the US alone. So if we take Lumen and bring it across to all our patients, how many US dollars can you actually save us with your technology?
It's a great question. I think the problem behind the problem is the interesting one. The problem is that it's almost that you can't give this to patient because the method is a lifestyle change and patients are attached to a healthcare system. Healthcare system currently, as it's positioned, as it's incentivized, is not really to help you change your lifestyle. It doesn't have the methods to help you with that. It doesn't have the tools.
But it's our job to actually make it happen.
Yes.
Because the first step in order to hack your lifestyle is taking responsibility for your own well-being. And by buying a Lumen product, you actually want to know more and want to go this route of behavior change to up-regulate your health and well-being.
Right. So it's not, I don't think that there is an impact. There is a huge impact there. The problem is how you get that. And product wins and lose on the way they're introduced to markets. And when we started talking to doctors about this, about metabolic health, about metabolic flexibility, even though we come from the clinical world, we realized that they have very little interaction points with their clients. And usually when they are, it's kind of too late. And we started building these products for the people who are healthy but concerned and are starting to trail towards the diabetes, pre-diabetic. And that's where we see the biggest opportunity these days, the intersection between wellness and healthcare. So when the healthy people have different jobs, different goals, for example, could be weight loss or could be performance, they want to better understand their nutrition and better understand their health. And that's the first step you get with Lumen. You get a realization of what's your metabolic health. Where does that fit on the axis of a person who is diabetic, on the one hand, on the other hand, of an athlete, right? And that is a paradigm that people are not really aware of in a way. And it's like being in shape and out of shape. And once you realize that, it moves you to take action on your nutrition, on your lifestyle. And unfortunately, I'm saying that with a lot of pain in my heart, healthcare system is not yet geared, as I see it, to be the solution. But it's getting there. We work with the insurance companies in the States, the biggest ones, and we work with clinics to validate Lumen effectiveness for different conditions, pre-diabetic as one major field we look into. But the secret sauce is really understanding getting the data, seeing and taking action based on what the algorithm tells you, what the system tells you, and the trust that you build not only with the data and the sensor, but with this ecosystem that we're building, that you can see the feedback loop and you start believing the recommendation as a guiding compass.
So if we really look at the market, so you already have 50,000 active users, so congratulations to having such a wide audience across this planet at this moment, and it's probably massively growing these days because given the pandemic, people struggle with movement, they eat more shit, and then they will end up being more obese after the pandemic. So if you would describe your target audience as of today, what would be your average customer look like?
So it's very interesting. I think they're split into two. There are people that have the biohacker mindset. They are nutrition aware. They're already seen success in nutrition, and they want to see the data and validate what they're currently doing. So we call them professional eaters, or people who really already care and already have invested and have already good habits in place. The other side of the spectrum is people who are embarking on a weight loss journey. And weight loss is on the border of health for some people. For some people, it's appearance, and for some people, it's performance. So it's not necessarily weight loss as a Weight Watcher theme, but what they seek is sense of control. It's not just pure weight loss. It's actually the mindset of, I know how my actions are impacting, so I have now an acceleration meter for my lifestyle.
Which I think it's control or rather motivation, that you need feedback in order to stay motivated to not jump off the train or of the bus.
I think control gives you that motivation. If you understand when you're good and when you're not, and you can see that, and it's not always a clear cut for a lot of people. So people who are metabolically flexible can go out at night sometime, have pizza, have alcohol, which is preventing you from better metabolism and preventing you from waking up on fat burn, which is what Lumen promotes. And they can get away with that. People who are healthy can definitely get away with that from time to time. People who are chronically doing this action and have poor sleep and have poor lifestyle, they deteriorate. So it's not such a clear cut. And I think that control allows you to let go. It allows you to live a balanced life by sometimes going on a vacation and really letting go a bit and not being too stressed, because diets are extreme by design, because they are born from marketing. And it's always fat is evil, carb is evil, and there are 5 things you should do and 5 things you should never do. And that extreme lifestyle is the opposite from balancing things through data.
Yeah.
So
and that's a funny thing. It's rather identifying the stupid things in life and try to stop them first before you add anything else. And it brings us with the topic of pizza. It brings me back to Phil, because that was my aha moment by experimenting with continuous glucose monitoring, is that usually we would recommend our athletes, you should not have pizza, because it would spike your glucose and whatsoever. But the funny thing is, the more fat you throw on a pizza, actually the more stable your glucose becomes, and the spike is not so terribly bad when you have a pizza that's rich with cheese and salami and stuff like this. Phil, what was your biggest learning while you experimented with Supersapiens, and what were the struggles that you faced in the early days of your product?
I feel like I'm living a mission, right? It's technology that has saved my life personally, time and time again, and it's technology that has empowered my athletes, to achieve. Team Novo Nordisk, they're the biggest global source of hope and inspiration for people with diabetes. Nearly 9 million fans on social media follow our team on a daily basis because they're heroes. So for me, it was just like one, solve for my previous business, which I've had for 16 years now. And then second, there's no science like in sport. And, we started with the very elite from professional sport, because that's then cascades down to, the weekend warriors. And, on the professional side, when every week someone comes up with here's the new oxygen that's going to solve for your problem. That's how it is in professional sport. So to rise above the noise without any data, there is no data out there of continuous glucose monitoring during exercise. Most of the doctors and exercise physiologists think, just based on the literature, that the human body is perfect at regulating glucose during exercise. So for us, some of the big things were, just putting it on people and getting their experience. We had one woman very early on trial. She'd done 2 Ironmans previously, and really, really impressive. She trains 20 hours a week. She's got 2 jobs or 2 children, a full-time job, but this was her passion. And she trained for an 11-hour time. And the first 2 times she did it, she finished in 13 and a half hours, right? She blew up in the run. And so we put a sensor on her before her 3rd Ironman. And we saw immediately in the days leading up to the event that she was hypoglycemic, majority of the time. She was underfueled. So we said, Julie, you need to eat, double your carbohydrate intake, get gas in the tank, and let's go. She broke her PR by 3 hours. And so, we came to market to prevent the bonk. That was the original thinking. But then, we saw with Julie that, it's the leading up to the event that matters. And so that was a good case study. And then, a good friend of mine who had been trying to get active, a leader in the diabetes world, and understands human physiology, metabolic health better than anyone in the world. And I said, why aren't you exercising? Well, I don't have time. COVID came. And I said, all right. He said, I want to get in shape now. What do I do? I said, get a sensor, get a bike, ride the bike 5 days a week. He wanted to be a better version of himself. Fast forward, a year down the road, the guy's riding 6 days a week, is addicted to cycling, has lost 45 pounds. And he credits not just exercise, but the sensor for helping him guide him along that journey. It's like it's accountability buddy. But to Daniel's point, I don't want to create a boring society, because I've had one of my investors said, I can't eat sushi anymore. The sushi causes a big spike, so I can't eat sushi. That's like diabetics in the 1980s and the 1990s. You can't do this, you can't do that. And I said, well, Robert, how about you earn your sushi? He said, what do you mean? I said, you ride Peloton, right? And he said, yeah. So I said, go do an hour ride on your Peloton first, and then go have the sushi. Lo and behold, no spike afterwards. So this is
I would actually challenge you and say that it's probably even better to do the Peloton ride after you had the sushi in order to dampen this metabolic effect, because I had the same thing. Sushi was the worst meal or the worst spike I created in continuous glucose monitoring. But the moment I move afterwards, I actually dampen the effects. And also what I had when I did the sushi, my sleep quality was really bad afterwards, if you compare it to other meals. And it will probably be better to do the movement afterwards.
Well, no, I'd counter that. We see what's called the afterburn. So if you do exercise for about an hour or more, you see about a 16-hour increase in metabolism, boost in metabolism. And so, we've got a wonderful Mexican restaurant 5 minutes from my office. We have creative lunches with our leadership team there, which sometimes include, adult lemonade. And me as a person with diabetes, to have this meal, I give, an injection upon getting in the restaurant, another injection when the food gets there, and then typically 2 more. I do, if I haven't exercised, about 18 units of insulin for this meal. Yeah. My colleagues without diabetes, their glucose all goes to 190, and then crashes right back down to normal levels, at which point they have a relative hypo and they feel like crap. So my co-founder, Todd, he's like, I don't like the spike, but I love this meal. I don't want to quit this meal. So he went on a 10-mile run, in the morning, came into work, then we went to lunch, and his spike, instead of going to 190 for the exact same meal, went to 118, and then subtly came back down. Mm-hmm. So, back to everyone needs to exercise, because pizza, I like pizza, right? It's fine, but pizza gives me a spike from the carbohydrates, and then another spike, call it 2 to 3 hours later once all the fat's released. Same thing with ice cream. And it's very hard to manage from a diabetic perspective. I'd rather have pizza at lunch than at dinner, because, giving extra bolus insulins at night. But what it does is it gives context, this data, this information as to how everything impacts your body, how exercise impacts your body. Carbohydrates raise your blood sugar, but so does protein. And you look at the type 1 diabetic population, average hemoglobin A1C in America amongst a 30,000 person registry is 8.8%, which arguably would be called failure. And you look at the system as a whole, and Daniel, to your point on healthcare, it's the doctors and the leading scientists of the world say carb count to every kid with diabetes. And so they give units for the insulin for the carbohydrates, but if they don't account for the fats and the proteins, they're going to have high glucose later, and they're going to feel like they failed. So we really have to take a look at how everything impacts metabolism. And I kid you not, I mean, it's what's been so exciting for me is that as more and more people get on this technology, they have such a deeper appreciation for what we people with diabetes, both type 1 and type 2, have to deal with. And at the end of the day, we're all human. We all have to be in this together if we want to create a healthier society. And it's my core belief that every human's an athlete. And I want to help all these athletes achieve their goals, whether that's get off the couch and go on your first walk after a meal for the first time in 20 years because you want to be the best version of yourself, or a gold medal in Tokyo where we've got a number of Olympic hopefuls using the technology to optimize their fueling on that end, and then everywhere in between. Because glucose, it's fuel for the body, it's fuel for the brain, and I think helping people have awareness for what does what to your body and how to control for it, how to earn what you want via exercise, the $1 billion drug that we need prescribed to every single person on the planet, starting with the youth.
And the future of medicine is more relying on the prescription of behavior change than on prescription of drugs. And that brings us to the breathing behaviors that Chris is actually collecting with his Halo mask. So Chris, when you see your company in 3 years now, what kind of habits or behavior changes do you want to drive in your clientele?
Yeah, I mean, if you'd asked me that question a year ago, it'd be a very different answer. Masking generally is not something that a lot of people love doing. And in Asia, we see a culture of masking that's been in place for a long time for a variety of reasons. I think, unfortunately, for those we lost in this last year, the pandemic has been, if anything, it's been a huge wake-up call in terms of the sort of the threats or the risk associated with breathing and just what's in the air. The awareness has gone up, just unbelievably. But fortunately, I think for public health, that's a good thing. I mean, the net effect of having masked over this last year, I think has really revealed a lot about, the benefits of preventing a bad flu season, for example. So I think there are some behaviors that are changing just through personal observation. And I think when we as a business think about the next couple of years, one of the important things that we're really focused on, because we didn't start the company because of the pandemic. We were really focused on air pollution as a primary threat. That threat is continuing to get worse. So as we, as a planet move forward and we think about our consumption, the behaviors that I think ultimately we're trying to connect in people's minds are, as Daniel said earlier, it's the problem behind the problem, which is our consumption. The stuff that we make, the stuff that we consume, all of the factories that we run, like that's what makes our air bad. And that bad air affects certain portions of the population more than others. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to start thinking about those behaviors. But from a health perspective, I think we will see a kind of a long tail of people continuing to mask voluntarily, for very specific reasons like air travel. I haven't met a single person anywhere in this last few months who hasn't said, like, look, every time I get on a plane, I'm going to be wearing a mask. That's something that, you would not have heard outside of a few key markets before this past year. And now it's something that's almost like it's global. That's something that everyone is saying. And I think it's a good idea.
So on on a global scale, we see everybody has to wear a mask the moment we step outdoors in most of the countries. And probably in a few weeks' time, hopefully the numbers get better, and people are probably happy to step outside without a mask. But I'm definitely agreeing with you that we're going to see masks way more often in the upcoming years, even the moment we beat the pandemic, because we realized that the flu season didn't hit it as badly as the previous years, because it had a positive upside that the corona pandemic familiarized us with wearing masks, and we realized if we invest in a proper fitting mask, it's not that terrible. And I'm really keen to try your product to see how much it makes my life easier in order to wear a proper fitting mask, and probably I will use it more often. So when we look at the data to the people aspect and where your company is heading in the next 3 years, so what kind of data points could you see in integrating either as a third-party app or as an added sensor in your mask device?
Well, certainly in the fitness area, this is a kind of a key focus for us. Looking at the kind of consumers that are very sort of fitness centric and nutrition oriented. They're interested in quantifying and really documenting their own metabolic behaviors, their own exercise. So integrating with some of those, I think your idea earlier is actually not unlike what we've been thinking about for quite a while with respect to Lumen. But I think looking specifically at again those kind of biomarkers and early detection around respiratory, because it's the easiest, it's the lowest hanging fruit. So apnea, COPD, those are two core areas that we've been very focused on. The science of orthomics is nascent, and there is a lot of sort of miniaturization happening in the technology space. But again, for us, the main thing is understanding breathing within the context of your whole life across all the activities that you're doing. So at rest and during intense activity. That for us is kind of the real main challenge. It's just deepening our relationship with the air around us while we're doing different things, and giving people that sort of dashboard, really understanding how they can affect their own breathing, not only for physical health, but their kind of emotional and mental health as well. There's a kind of a hardcore science part of that, where we're looking at actual data metrics. There's more of a behavioral side to that, and we're focused right now on building the behavioral base, and then layering on some of the more, I guess, sensor technology that we've been thinking about. But that's still a couple of years away. I mean, in terms of miniaturization. So there's a lot of kind of core development that's going on right now, but and I'm sure Daniel can speak to this as well. I mean, it's a race around sort of MEMS level sensing, yep, and what can be worn on the body, or what can be, let's say, stable while portable.
Yeah. That brings us to funny wrap-up questions. So before we wrap this session up, I would like to throw a curveball question to our three panelists. And this is the one thing that I didn't prepare you for, because I wanted to get an one-off answer. Natalia just announced that they have a partnership with one of the big publishing houses that have a monopoly for information in pharmacy. So they produce a newspaper, a magazine that's coming quite often on the market, and it's huge. It's the biggest magazine for the health topic and fitness. So when you get a free ad, Daniel, a full page free ad, what message do you want to bring across of your key learnings and to your audience?
Oh, that is a curveball.
I know.
It's a very good question. Yeah, I think that I would, for me, if I have a full page, not a sentence, I will give the case of why metabolic flexibility is probably the most compounding and the most impactful metric that healthy and unhealthy people should start understanding and unveiling. on their body. That would be the case. Because in a way, the moment data enters any spectrum, you see that in any space, the moment data enters, the whole industry changes. And weight loss industry or nutrition industry in general is being fueled by marketing and is being fueled by beliefs, but it's not being fueled by real science and data so far. So that would be my pitch. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, that was a great answer. So Phil, I'd like to take, what is your message that you want to bring across in the free newspaper ad?
2 parts. One is the prescription to exercise. So Grace, like, let's just do it. And then second is permission to prioritize exercise. Because at the end of the day, time is our most precious resource. And majority of the reason that people stop exercising is because this is more important. That's more important. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And I think of it every day when my 7-year-old, I go for a bike ride and my 7-year-old son says, "Daddy, you're leading. Like, you're going." I say, "Alexander, me going to exercise now means I'm going to be healthier. I'm going to be happier, and I'm going to be able to take care of your grandkids when you have them some years down the road. So I have to prioritize this, and I want you to know as a young boy that when you get older, you too will have to prioritize exercise." So I think we need to, like, my wife has seen and using the sensor under trial that exercise has a good metabolic impact for her. She understands what it means for mental health. She understands that I need it now and can see the data that when I exercise, my glucose control is better. So I think it's just simple. The prescription to go do it and the permission slip that you can use every time you want to exercise, because at the end of the day, if you don't exercise, you're not going to be able to take care. You're not going to be healthy, and you're not going to be able to take care of those that you love and those that you care for.
When we speak about low-hanging fruit, and Chris brought this up in this discussion, that you want to go for the low-hanging fruit, and I would rather write the prescription for movement instead of exercise, because exercise for many parts in the population has a negative connotation to it, because they always hated it when they were at school, when they did sports, stuff like this. But when we speak about movement in the first place, everybody knows that movement is good for you, and giving you opportunities to even squeeze in bits of movement, even on a virtual meeting day, is super important.
But I challenge, exercise comes with a goal. Movement.
I agree.
It was my ad, not yours, but I do agree. More movement is definitely better. Any chance you can walk, it's better. It speeds up the metabolism. So if you can do a call while you're walking instead of a Zoom, go do that. But so let's we'll exercise or move. But exercise comes with a goal. Goal comes with motivation, and then that's the way you can hold yourself accountable.
Perfect. I love it. Chris, what is your message that you want to bring across to the audience in the newspaper ad?
Yeah, I think we'd probably want to focus on exposure. It's like you can be the healthiest person in the world, have the best diet in the world. If you're breathing bad air, your health is going to be compromised, and it's invisible. It's out of sight, out of mind, but it does matter. So I think what we would really want to focus on is giving people that deeper understanding around the atmosphere that they move and live and breathe in, and how it affects their health. And that's something that we think, clean breathing is a human right. It's not something people really think about at all. They take it for granted, but we all live in compromised air. Some of us live in worse than others, but it does have a cumulative effect over the long-term health of an individual and of a population.
Guys, I also have a question for you. Do you really read newspapers or magazines?
Of course, we read yours, Natalia.
That's not mine yet. Okay, guys, thank you so much for this great session. I learned a lot, and I believe we need to repeat that one because we have so many questions from the audience. We couldn't answer them this time, but guys, don't be sad. We'll come back to that, and we'll definitely run more events and webinars around those topics. So thank you so much for your great insights. I must say, I will not eat my pizza tonight.
Thank you, Natalia, for having us.
You do just go on a walk afterwards.
Well, with a lot of fat, right?